This is all about consumer and producer surplus. We're going to learn how to find the coordinates of the equilibrium point, how to find the consumer surplus at the equilibrium point, and the producer surplus. And what are these two things? How to interpret them on the graph, and how to calculate them. To do this, we start by introducing a definition. P is d of x is called the demand function for x number of items or units, which is the price that a consumer is willing to pay for x units of a certain product. So we're going to learn several new terms in this section and apply them. And the next one we introduce is S of x is the supply function. So D for demand, S for supply, which is a price that a producer is expecting to get for selling X units of a certain product. It's kind of like seller and buyer. So the first one, the demand, is for the buyer and the supply for the seller. So if we look at this on the graphically, we have the x-axis and P of x on the y-axis. So the supply function goes as increasing, and the demand function is going down. Why? Because the buyer would love to pay less, right? So it's gonna, as x goes up, the demand function goes down, and as x increases, like the number of units increases, the supply function goes up, is increasing. Because as he sells more and more, the more he sells, the more he expects to get back. That's why the supply goes up, and the demand is the more he buys, the less he's expecting to pay. And whatever the supply and the demand function intersect at point, we call it E. That's the equilibrium point. And how do we find the coordinates of the equilibrium point? All we have to do, we set the two equations equal to each other, the demand and the supply, and we solve for x, because you're going to get an equation. Then we substitute it back either in d of x or s of x to find the value of y. So what we do here is, if we let P equals d of x, that's the demand function, the consumer surplus for Q units, so we assume we have Q units of a certain product at a price capital P, is going to be given by, that's the definition of consumer surplus, is the integral from 0 to Q d of x, capital D of x dx minus Q times P. That's how we calculate the consumer surplus. And the consumer surplus is basically the shaded region in black, as you see on the graph. It's above the horizontal line and below d of x. And why is that? Because the first part here, this part represents the area below d of x. So the one that is colored with like rainbow colors, minus this one here is the area of the rectangle in yellow. So what is saying, if you subtract them, so if you take the rainbow color region minus the yellow, you get the one in black, and that's the consumer surplus. We're gonna try to find the consumer surplus for the demand function given by d of x equal x squared minus 6x plus 16 when x equals 1. So again, the formula to find the consumer surplus is the integral from 0 to q minus q d of x dx minus qp. So here, the p here, the capital P, which is the price, is evaluated at x equals 1, and that gives us 11. So the consumer is willing to pay $11 per 1 unit. So when x is 1 unit, then to find the consumer surplus, remember we need d, this is d of x, right? And then it says q times p. So this is p here, and that's q. Q is the number of units, 1 unit. And now we need to use what we learned before about how to do integrals like this to integrate this. Just to remind you, that's called antiderivative. If you want to find antiderivative for something like x squared dx, you just add 1 to this and divide by the same number. So that's what I did, x cubed over 3 minus, keep the 6 out. There's a 1 here, you add 1 to that, divide by the same number. 16x from 0 to 1 minus 11. And to evaluate this, substitute the 1 in minus the 0 in. So that gave me about 2.33. So that's the consumer surplus. That's the one we just found. That's how we calculate the consumer surplus. Now the next one is how we calculate the producer surplus. So the producer surplus, let P equal S of X for the supply function. Then the producer surplus is calculated using QP minus the integral of 0 to Q S of X dx. Why is that? Because Q times P, that's the area of the rectangle, the area of this rectangle here. And this one here gives me the area below the curve that I'm gonna shade in blue, this one. So if you take the shaded one vertically minus the blue one, that gives us the one in the yellow. That's called producer surplus. So Q is the number of units, and P is the price function. S is the supply function. Find the producer surplus for this function. S of X equals 1/2 X plus 1 at X equals 6. To run the calculation, Q again is 6. So we find the supply function, or P is S, calculated as S of 6, which is 1/2 times 6 plus 1. That gives us 4. Then we go back to the function or the equation. Q, or the formula QP, Q is 6 and P is 4, minus 0 to 6, 1/2 X plus 1 dx. And that gives me the antiderivative of X is X squared over 2. Antiderivative of 1 is X from 0 to 6. Then we need to substitute the upper bound first into this, minus the 0 next. That gives us 24 minus 15, which is 9. We're given two functions, demand and supply. We're required to find three things: the coordinates of the equilibrium point, find the consumer surplus at that equilibrium point. So equilibrium point E, and then we need to find the producer surplus at the same point. To find the equilibrium point or the coordinates, we stated earlier that we need to set d of x and s of x equal to each other. And to solve such equation, if you do not remember the formula to expand the x minus 4 square, you can rewrite it as x minus 4, multiply that out. People say FOIL it. You can FOIL, multiply x by x, x by 4, 4 by x, 4 by 4. Then combine like terms and solve the easy linear equation for x. I got x equals 1. This is the x coordinates for point E. Now to find the y coordinates, you can substitute x equals 1 in either one of the equations. So if you substitute in s, you get s of 1, which is 9. Or if you substitute in d, you will get the same result. So E would be 1, 9. Those are the coordinates of point E. Again, note that 1 is Q and P is the price. Q is the number of items. Part B, they want us to find the consumer. See, if you look at part B, consumer surplus, it has the formula we introduced today, 0 to Q dx, d of x dx minus PQ. From the equilibrium point, we found P and Q. And d of x is x minus 4 square. So first thing, to find the antiderivative of x minus 4 square, we need to expand it as we did earlier, multiply it out. So that gives us x cubed over 3 minus 8x squared over 2 plus 16x. So that gives us an answer of 3 1/3. we need to find the producer surplus. The formula for that we introduced today, QP minus the integral from 0 to Q S of x dx. All these are given, we just substitute them in. And we need to find out how to integrate this or find antiderivative. Then I found the antiderivative for x squared plus 2x plus 6, evaluate from 0 to 1. So with the calculations, we get 5/3. We are going to do the same questions. Find the equilibrium point, the coordinates, the consumer surplus, and the producer for these two functions, d of x, the demand, and the supply. Let's continue. So to find the consumer surplus or the equilibrium points, cross multiply. That gives me x is 100. If you substitute back in d of x or in this, you will get the same value, which is 10. So again, this value is the Q value, and this is the P value. Q and P. So we're gonna substitute those in here in the integral, 100 over square root of x dx minus 100 times 10. Take the 100 out, x to the negative 1/2. The antiderivative of x to the negative 1/2 is x to the 1/2 over 1/2. This 1/2 in the denominator becomes 2. Two square root of 100 minus 2 square root of 0 minus 1,000. So that gives me 1,000 for the consumer surplus. For the last one, we do QP minus the integral of 0 to Q S of x dx. We can rewrite this as x to the 1/2 to be able to find the antiderivative. That gives me, if you take the 1/2, add 1 to it, that's 3/2. That's where that came from. And then divided by 3/2, but you flip it, it's much faster, 2/3. And then we need to evaluate this at 100 minus at 0. Keep the brackets here, very important to keep them out because of the negative sign. If you put that on the calculator, you get 1,000 over 3, as some of you got.